This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Abom. We're continuing in Mishna Berura Daf HaShavua. We're up to Siman Lamed Beis, and we're still in Seif Tes Zayin. We're at the end of Seif Tes Zayin, and we're up to Mishna Berura Sivkatan Nun Vav. The Mechaber says that the allowance, the Mechaber said, when are we machshir if there's a hefsek in a letter? That's if it was written correctly, and then there's a hole in the letter. But if originally it was written with a hole in it, or, the Mechaber says, if the leg of the chaf, or similarly, reaches the end of the klaf without any hekif gevil, hekif klaf, it's pasul. Meaning, what's the issue with the hole by the letter? The issue with the hole is then it's not mukaf gevil. So that's only there's only an allowance for that in a situation where it came afterwards. But where it was written that way mitchilasai, there is no allowance for such a thing. Says in Mishna Berura Sivkata Nun Vav, nekev dafka nekev oikera. Dafka, a hole or a tear, av she'ein nikar klal hefsek, even though the hefsek is not recognized at all. The issue here is that if there's a hole or a tear, it was not surrounded by parchment at the time it was written. Aval hefsek ba'alma kosher, but a hefsek alone is kosher. Ve'in sarch shum tikon, and it doesn't need any fixing. Kivan sheyesh shiur ois ad makemahu, since there is a correct amount Okay, so here we're talking about the Mishna Berura saying if there's a hole or a tear, then it's not mukav gevil. But if it's stama hefsek, it's kosher and it doesn't need any tikkun. Why? Kivan sheyesh shiur ois ad makemahu, because you have the requisite shear until that spot. Meaning, let's say like this: you have the long chaf. So if there's a hole in it, so aside from the fact that we don't know if the leg is long enough, but where the hole is, there's no parchment. So then, there's no parchment surrounding the letter. Or if there's a tear, there's no parchment surrounding the letter. But if it's just, there's a hefsek in the letter. The ink, whatever, did not go smoothly, so there's a hefsek in the letter. So provided that the leg is long enough, you do have mukaf gevil. Aval hefsek ba'alma kosher, ve'in sarch shum tikkun, you don't need any tikkun. Kivan sheyesh shiur ois ad makemahu, since there's the measurement of a letter until that spot. Ve'im nimtza ois ritois dakois b'soich shiur ois, if you have small scratches, so it's not a hefsek, it's like a hairline scratch. You know, sometimes you could, when you're reading it regularly, you don't even notice it, but there could be like a hairline fracture, a hairline scratch. Then look in the Bir Halacha and Sif Chavhei. Regel, v'chol shekain gage ha'oisiyos ve'emtsa'an she'ein lohem hekav gvil be'is haksiva. Certainly, if there would be a tear or a hole in the roof of a letter, so then this letter is not surrounded by parchment at the time it's written. The nakat regel l'ravusa, it picked regel as a chidush. After be'es kesivas soif haregel, even though at the time of writing the end of the regel kvar nigmar tsuras ha'ois karoi, even though at the time of writing the end of the leg, the tsura of the ois is completed. Afilu hachi kozman shaloi silek yadam in ois, so long as you did not take your hand away from the letter, mikri davar zeh be'is haksiva. This is considered at the time of the writing. Uva'inan l'chol ha'ois hakafas gevil. You need the whole letter to be surrounded by gevil. So what's the Mishna Berura saying? It says the leg as a chidush. Let's say at the time you're writing the end of the leg, so now the tsuras ha'ois is finished. Nevertheless, if you haven't taken your hand away from the letter, this is considered at the time of the writing, and you need the whole letter to be surrounded by gevil. Okay, now I understand. We're talking about a situation where you're writing a long chaf, and the long chaf is going all the way to the end of the parchment. So when it goes all the way to the end of the parchment, the bottom of the leg is not surrounded by parchment because it goes all the way to the end. But you might think, okay, but big deal. A second before the letter was kosher, and I just went a little bit more, but that second before, it was surrounded by gevil. And then after it was written, kahoigen, then it was reached the end and was no longer surrounded by gevil. So you would think that it should be okay. Because look, the only time you need it to be surrounded by gevil is when it was written originally. But if it happened after, it doesn't have to be surrounded by gevil. So you would think, okay, it happened after. Because the second before, the ois was nigmar, and it was surrounded by gevil. And then later on, it happened that it was not surrounded. No, this is all called b'shas haksiva. Okay, says the Mishna Berura of Katan Nun Ches, beli hekef. Va'afilu imhi aruka karoi. Even if it's long enough, dahinu sheyesh bashir. Namely, there is an amount, sha'afilum nigura k'tzas lamata. Even if you would scrape a little bit, yishar tzuras ha'ois, mikol makom pasal. Meaning, let's say it's very, very long, this end of chaf. So you could have scraped the bottom. It's still pasal because lamaisa, it's not hukaf gevil. Now, so you say, of course it's pasal, but so let me scrape it. The answer is you could scrape it, but we're talking about where you're not. So if we're talking about where you're not scraping it, what's the Mishna Berura adding, even if it's long enough? So the Dirshu explains, he brings in the name of Radach, that any large letter that has the shiur, that if you would scrape it, it would be kosher. It's kosher even before you scrape it. So why don't we say the same thing over here? That if there's a klal, that any letter, that it would be kosher if you scrape, so it should be kosher now. The answer is lamaisa right now, it's not hukaf gevil metchilasai. Sivkad nun tes, avlam nechtaf haklaf achar kach v'ayideze in mukaf gevil kosher. If let's say the klaf on the bottom got trimmed, and then it's no longer mukaf gevil, it's kosher. Pasal. V'imroitze l'sakein, if you want to be misakein, yigarer ktsas, you could scrape it a little bit. Kedei sheyiyah mukaf gevil. If you want to be misakein, you could scrape a little bit so that it is mukaf gevil. So the Mishna Berura is saying, if you want to fix it, you could scrape a little bit so that it's mukaf gevil. Avol dibuk matlis loy mahani lahakafas gevil. But adding a patch will not help to make it be considered mukaf gevil. In other words, let's say you want to add some klaf on the bottom. Let's say the end of chaf went all the way to the bottom of the klaf, and it wasn't mukaf gevil. So you'll say, okay, I'll add to the bottom of the parchment, and now it will be mukaf gevil. That doesn't help. Why? Diba'inan hakafas ha'ois miguf hastam. It has to be surrounded from the actual Sefer Torah, and you can't add a matlis, you can't add a patch. The Dirshu brings, the Taz in Yoredei and Hilchos Sefer Torah says, Hadbakas matlis does help for hakafas gevil. Says the Prima Gadim, that's only when the matlis was connected to the gevil at the time of the ksiva, but not when it was written bipsul and it became mukafas gevil through a patch. Meaning, if you want to scrape the letter, that will be machshuret after the ksiva. But matlis only helps, according to the Shita of the Taz, if the patch was there from the beginning, not if the patch came after the fact. Okay, Rabbi, so we'll hold it over here. And then we'll pick it up Monday in Sif Yud Zayin. Sif Tes Zayin was one of the longest Seifim we had so far in Ar Chaim. regarding the din of mukav kvil, which is a requirement from the beginning of the ksiva and is not an issue if there was a lack of it after. Okay, have a wonderful Shabbos. Bracha v'atzlacha.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.